Company versus personal purpose. Should the two be separated? Cool. So this is a really cool quote that I kind of live by and thrive by. It reads, "The thing of which I am a part is greater than the part I play." And I did pose this question, but I forgot I did. And you've really got to bear with me because I am, right now, I'm on such demand. I've had 4 meetings today before I've come to this event. I've got someone really lovely who manages my diary. And then I have to kind of bung up presentations for different events, and the different events have different themes, and I have to adapt my story to each theme. So, should the two be separated? And I'll pose that question. I won't give an answer for it. But I kind of live by this idea. The thing of which I'm a part is greater than the part I play. And so what am I a part of? So I set up this company, which I'll explain a bit more later, Drummer Boy Studios. And very briefly, Drummer Boy Studios is a business where we take over premises. So we're looking at taking over premises in the community and redeveloping them for creative use. And this cool situation, 56 black men, which is 56 black men. And I'll explain a bit more about that as we move forward. So this is an interesting message. I don't believe in this message, but it's an interesting one. You will know your purpose once you find yourself. You kind of grow up in life and, I definitely came across this. And I know many people who have. Find yourself. What does that mean? Find yourself. It's kind of weird, lost yourself and now you have to find yourself. And I say, how do you find something you never had? So if you've never been 60 before, how do you find the 60-year-old you? Remember, we're talking about purpose. So how do you find this person that you've never been before? And I say, I believe that life is about the creation itself. And I pose the question of, who are you creating? And I'll read, to create authentically, we need to try and gain an understanding of what existed before this point and what exists now in the creation of self. And so this is a good starting point to explore what you are passionate about, understanding that the things you are passionate about fuel our purpose. Who are you? It's an interesting question. It's very short, but many people don't know. And I speak to a lot of people generally, and something I challenge people that I speak to do is look in the mirror and ask that question. Who are you? We come out our house and we engage with society and we put on our fancy clothes, and our makeup. And as the lady that presented before me says, "Hello, my name is Cephas, what do you do?" And you respond, "I am a..." What do you do?
Man.
No, you're not a black man, you're clearly white. What do you do?
I thought you were asking me about...
No. So I'm failing at giving a bit of dialogue. So, hello, my name is, you should have rehearsed it. My name is Cephas. What do you do?
I work in advertising. So.
Cool, and we do this on a daily basis. But do we really know who we are? We introduce ourselves by our work. We don't necessarily introduce ourselves by our purpose or by what we're passionate about, which is cool, but it's what we do. I also pose the question of what is your story? And I'm someone who now I speak to, and actually over the years, a bit more amplified now, many people at senior levels, so your C-suite and your executives and investors, high net worth earners and all those people who can afford to eat in Sloane Square in Knightsbridge. They invite me, which is cool. And they say, I don't have a story. I grew up with a silver spoon. But everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. But it's about exploring that story, in my opinion. And I believe that in exploring the story of your life and understanding who you are creating, we can perhaps discover purpose. And so I'll start with this. When did you feel most vulnerable? And I want everyone in the room to think about this. I'm about to take you into my journey and my story about when I felt most vulnerable and what inspired what I believe is my purpose. I want everyone to think about when you felt most vulnerable. I say when you're in the toilet taking a crap. if we kind of just expose that to the whole world, that might be your most vulnerable position. But comics aside, in your life, in your story, what point did you actually feel most vulnerable? Was it family infused? Was it at school? Was it at work? Was it on the train? When have you felt most vulnerable? And so for me, it was depression. When I was 16, many years ago, I went through severe depression. And I wanted to take my life. You know, I didn't believe love existed. So I would give a lot. You know, I'd be there for people and such. At a very young age, I would speak to people older than me and give advice or whatever. And I just got to a point where I didn't feel like people gave me that same love back. And I was extremely depressed. And I wanted to take my life. And what saved me was this concept I came up with. And I'm currently writing a book. And in that book, I detail this idea. And the idea says, I took everybody out of the room at this age, and I imagined the world with just me and nobody else in it. At that point, I came to the realization that if there was no one else in this world, I was in New Cross, South East London at the time. I used to write on my walls and such. I went mute for about a year as well, which is worth saying, so I didn't speak to anyone, just to myself. I came to the realization that if there was no one else in this world, there'd be no reason for my existence. And so I added everybody back in one by one. And I came to this notion, this idea, that without people, there's no purpose. And that's why I didn't take my life. I said, okay, well, if without people there's no purpose, then add everybody back in one by one, and perhaps I'm not just here for myself. Perhaps I'm here for everybody else. And, you know, it sounds quite simple. It was a very tough time for me. But this is the notion that brought me out of that depression. This is another quote that stuck by me. Your belief is subject to your understanding. It's a quote I made up. And the notion says, the older you are, the more you understand, the less you believe. The younger you are, the less you understand, the more you believe. And it reads in full, your information informs your belief informs your understanding, and your understanding informs your actions. And so, we cannot act upon which we are not informed. And I guess through my purpose-driven presentation, I'm going to take you through my information from a perspective of a black man, you know, and how that informed my understanding, and how that informed my belief, and how that informed. And this is a notion I come up with when I was 16, many, many years ago. And I expand a bit about this in my book. So here's a picture of a book that I wrote in 2018 about 56 black men. I broke down in 2018, I broke down 56 black men, Drummer Boy Studios, and Cephas Williams. Now, I'm not a big fan of people that do multiple things at one time. I advise people not to, but 56 black men took off extremely quickly, and so I had to attach my attention to it. My major business is Drummer Boy Studios, as James said. But I wrote down what I wanted to achieve. In 2019, I'd achieved about 60% of what I wrote down in my diary. This is a bit about my journey. So this is the house I was born into, so in New Cross. And that is not me as a baby, but, you know, it's a very groovy looking picture of me looking at my phone, pretending to text someone outside the house I was born in. But I was born in Lewisham, South East London, and as I grew, I moved all over the place. I've got a very nuanced experience of the United Kingdom and the world. I wanted to be an architect, and at the time, this was the system they used to dictate, you know, what career path or who you would be in school, and we put a floppy disk in that, and you know, out comes your destiny or your purpose. And I was told you can't be an architect because the computer said you can't. Computer literally says no. So, you know, no. But I wanted to be an architect, apparently. Anyway, I'm not now. But that's what I wanted. And they said no. So, fast forward down the line, I was resilient. And this is the only time I'll ever be able to boast about a model I made at school. So here you go. This is my third year project, do you know what I mean? And this is a proud moment for me because it was, in my opinion, and quite a few people's opinion, one of the best models that year. And I'd worked really hard throughout the 3 years. It was a very tough time for me, but I did it, and this is the trophy to show for it. So I studied architecture, part 1. Hands up, anyone know much about architecture? Who doesn't know about architecture? Oh, wow, I'm going to have to explain a lot. There's a couple architecture references that I'm going to have to like really give context to, and I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to... This is another angle of my beautiful model. And in that process, it was a building called the Torre David in Caracas that stood out to me. Who knows about the Torre David? Nobody. Okay, so this is a portrait image of the facade of the Torre David, and quick context behind it. It's a building where the developers in Venezuela died, and as such, the building wasn't completed. And so there was also at the same time a kind of migration of people who didn't have homes, and they found this building that no one was inhabiting, and there was no money, and they took it over, and this is what they created. This is their version of what that tower would look like, obviously with the minimum resources they had and such. And I feel like there's something quite poetic about this. You know, if you've got time and you're interested in this kind of stuff, research into the Torre David. But I use this as an example to pose the question of who's creating the community, right? And here's a video of a black guy on Good Morning Britain who basically talks on this notion, but from the perspective of a black person. Obviously, we were aware of gentrification and what's happening in the communities. And I'll play the video and I'll expand on it in a second.
It's not work. Listen, I've grown up in some of these communities that you guys are talking about, and prison always, it's not a deterrent. Some of these boys, they don't fear prison. If you don't change the environment, you won't change anything, and that's the key thing. If you don't change the environment, this has been happening for years, okay? Years, yeah? And it's not always in the media, but it won't change.
There's a massive place for it.
It's going to take several things to come together. Yes, policing is one thing, but at the end of the day, if you don't change these boys' environment, all of you guys on that side, you benefited, yeah, from the environment that you've grown up in, okay? You benefited from being in this work environment. I benefited from it. But these boys, not all of them get to benefit from the environment. If you don't show them something else, you won't change it.
I take your point, and you've made it very eloquently before. And I can't put myself into the shoes of a young black kid on the streets of London right now, right?
Cool. So this is really fucked up image. Like they're talking about knife crime, all this kind of stuff, and the community this and the community that, basically about black people. And the panel is literally like 5 white people, you know. And the weatherman wasn't even in the conversation, bro. Like he was just outside the set, mate. Do you know what I mean? And he's like, "Yo, fuck this, I'm black." You know? So you just realised, and he shouts out, and that was the result. And I guess the key thing here is environment. Who is creating our community? And so, you know, these things were frustrating me and were adding. But actually, to be honest, this came after 56. But this is the general notion that has been going on for many years. And so I'll quickly go into this notion of what's happening in the communities. And so they're knocking down buildings in our communities for the idea of a better city. And I pose the question of who are these people and where do they go in the wake of gentrification? And what does prosperity and hope look like for this guy? And I say here, it's not their fault, but this is the image that has replaced the community that I grew up in, alongside bespoke coffee shops and bars. And there's a disconnect between this narrative and this narrative. And this was a cool picture I found. It said, "Condos kill culture." We don't have condos in the UK, it's American, but I fucks with it. So I've kind of put build aspirations, not apartment. And this quite nicely leads into what Drummer Boy is actually about. As that's the backlog of, I guess, the social change that I'm trying to push and trying to lead. And I walked away from my part 2 in architecture to pursue Drummer Boy fully. And so what we did with Drummer Boy is, actually before I explain what we did, so the general notion of Drummer Boy is, how do we connect, initially, the creative industry to the community or the community to the creative industry? And these are hard to reach. These are hard to reach individuals, you know. Or these are disengaged, you know, or disadvantaged, BAME, all these buzzwords. And my thing was, you know, they won't do anything to change it, so I'm just going to do it myself. So I walked away from my part 2 in architecture, and I said, I'm going to create this space. And sometimes the disadvantage isn't poverty. Sometimes the disadvantage is access. And the idea that, you know, every time we build great architecture, it's on the other side of the river. And these people don't actually have the access to use the spaces and the facilities they need to grow their creative talent and access the industry. And so by doing so, I create something sexy in the community, and we can get some professionals within the creative industry to also be tenants, and we can get some people from the community. And so when we now start talking about social mobility, it's not just a buzzword in a conversation, but it's actually happening, and it's led by someone that understands the community we look to serve. And so, no hope in the world. I walked away from my part 2. Nobody promised me anything. Literally was saving up to buy a house. And I put my money into this piece of shit at the time in Peckham High Street. And we turned that building, derelict building, into this, Drummer Boy Studios. And along Peckham High Street, it was, by definition of culture, white, Afghanistani, Asian, Afghanistani white, young black, me, white, Asian, Afghanistan. And only 27-year-old black man with a shop on Peckham High Street. And the community would, oh, bro, like, it's so, yo, bro, you got a shop. And I'm looking at it like, this is so easy. Like, this is not the highlight of the century, but for where I'm from, like, to have achieved this is huge. And so if that's the height of my community's thinking to some degree, then we've got a very long way to go. Like, there's people that own edifices in Sloane Square and the rest, as I mentioned. You know, we're excited because I've put a Drummer Boy logo on top of the shop, which is great, but, you know, there's so much more to be achieved. And the vision was to roll it out, you know, so it's not just have one space, but to almost become the WeWork of the creative industry. But our USP in initial stages is to have a very socially driven mission that serve the communities in the areas where we exist. And so if we exist in Peckham, which is heavily black populated, we should have a specific mission towards the black community. So there are a few cool images of what we turned this piece of shit into. It was a council-owned building, and I designed the place myself. You can tell it was done by an architect student because we put concrete on the floor. Anywhere you see concrete on the floor, that motherfucker was confident that what they were creating was solid. Once you've laid this, you cannot rewire, you can't, you know, there's certain things that can't be done. So this was a big move for me. So we wired the place ourselves. I'd never done building work before, you know. B&Q bits, and that story is so poetic. I'm going to go into it someday. Went to B&Q, literally in my boy's car, to buy plasterboard, right? So we get to B&Q, we start stacking all this bloody plasterboard, like 40, 50 sheets of plasterboard, literally. And then we pay for it, and I'm like, bro, like, how are we going to get this back to the studio? Like, how do we have you carried a piece of plasterboard 40, 50? And then, you know, randomly, there was a black guy with a van, and was like, bro, like, we need to get this back to Peckham, bro. And he was like, got you, do you know what I mean? He helped us. And there's so many things, like, do you know that you're not allowed to just, not allowed, but you can rip the whole building down, but where do you dump this stuff, bro? These are things I didn't consider. I'd studied architecture, you know, to my part 2 masters, and so when we stripped everything back, put everything to bin bags, I was like, okay, cool, let's just dump, but hang about, I said, let's not dump it on the streets, because that shouldn't be good. And we looked into it, and it's actually called fly tipping, and you can get fined, you know? And so we drove around, literally looking for, like, and we randomly found the fly tipping centre of London in Bermondsey, like it's a joke. And then we found out that, you know, you can't drive ordinary cars in here, mate. So we literally had to commandeer another van. And anyways, very poetic story. I will expand on it at some point in my life. But this is a few images of the building. And so it flexed up as kind of studio space, multi-purpose space, co-working space. And we were testing out certain things. We wanted to scale it up from there. And so at the position now we want to scale it up. At this point I'd engaged some key people, Sadiq Khan being one of them. We were in front of a £70 million regeneration match fund from the government to redevelop spaces in the community. I'm also currently in front of this particular building in Lewisham and a few others that we're looking at. It's these two floors within this building. So it's 22,000 square feet stretched across 2 floors. The owners have offered me many things on top of £1 million for capital contribution, which, if anyone knows about property here, is crazy for the owner to offer you that for you to redo the building right now at Shilling Court. At the same time, I'd engage this company, BDP, BDP are, on paper, the second largest architecture practice in Europe, for which I speak to a gentleman called Chris Harding, who's the global chairman. And his words to me were, anything you build in a community, we'd be happy to redevelop, which is fucking huge, mate. Like, you know, studying architecture, like talking to these guys, they're going to redevelop. They've not touched a stone in Lewisham or Peckham, you know? So this is huge. And anyone who knows architecture would know this guy, whose name is Richard Rogers. Who knows Richard Rogers here? Nobody. Ah! I'm joking. You said you know him.
I've heard of him.
Oh, you've heard of him. Did you know what he does?
He's an architect.
Do you appreciate his work?
If I've got it, if I can recall, yeah. Did you do the Pompidou?
Yeah. So Richard Rogers is, in my opinion, probably the most prominent architect alive right now. You know, globally. So for the, you know, non-architect people, he did the Millennium Dome. But beyond the Millennium Dome, he's, you know, yeah. Just Google Richard Rogers. So I say this not to boast, but also just to give context. So I speak to Richard directly, which is cool. I met Richard first time. This is what I'm trying to do, Rich, blah, blah, blah. Richard walks into the room like a legend, you know what I mean? Like the Godfather, like just by himself. I'm like, yeah, Richard, blah, blah. We was at some really rich person's house. And tell him what I'm trying to achieve. How come every time I create stuff on the other side of the river, it's rubbish quality, you know? And he's like, you know, here's my number, let's talk about some stuff. That was cool. So he's involved, which should be headline news, man. Like, this is like the person that inspired Steve Jobs saying to the next tech startup, I will be involved in your project. Not Steve Jobs, the person that inspired Steve. And, you know, I'm thinking this stuff should be headline news. But the only headline news that I was seeing about black men was about knife crime. And that was a bit weird for me. And at the same time, I was in the current studio I was in, facing eviction from my local council, who didn't want to see us there, and the crooked landlord, for reasons I couldn't explain to you. I could not. We peg it to jealousy and bipolar, you know, disorder, to be polite. That's the polite version. Otherwise, it's a bit dark if it's not, you know, that you're bipolar. One day he'd be this, the next day he's that. And they just wanted us out. And even as a concept, I feel like I should have got support from local council or somebody, let alone all of the people I've brought around the table that you've seen so far. And there's more, you know. But these are the people I've put in the presentation. And I couldn't understand it. And it was all that frustration. You know, I said to myself, I was sitting in my studio one day and, you know, the general idea of someone that looks like me is that I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And I walk into rooms all day. I've been to meetings where I'm the person leading the meeting. It's like, you know, we're waiting for Cephas Williams. And it's like, it's me. My surname is Williams because of slavery. Ooh. Don't know what kind of room I'm in, you know. But that's the truth, man. You know, it's a Welsh name, but do I look Welsh? No. You know, but it is what it is. Anyways, you know, that's what I went through, and that's what gave birth to 56. I don't believe in doing multiple things at the same time. But my thing was, okay, if the news is not going to spotlight us, and this is why people are not taking me serious in rooms, I'm going to show us. You know, and I'm going to spotlight 56 black men, and this came from a statistic, and this is, you know, one of the images of everyone together. And this was a statistic taken last year when the knife crime publication was at ultimate high. And I said, okay, cool. If it's 56 black men that had been killed, or black people, sorry, not men, have been killed, but the gender match to that statistic was always men. Like, I've never seen in the newspaper, black woman stabbed, you know, or white man, Asian, no, but it's always black men, right? And the statistics actually show that we're not the majority of people that are committing knife crime or victims of it. But long and short, that's what that was. So I said, I'm going to pick 56 and I'm going to spotlight them for something different. And this is some of the images. I'll just click through these quite quickly. So they're portrait images of 56 men, and it featured everywhere from the BBC to Guardian. The images went global. I released the images the day before Christmas last year, so very recent. And the day after Christmas, we had 1,000 organic followers and 300,000 impressions. And I'd only released 2 of the images, so people hadn't actually seen the full series. And you can see here it's everything from, you know, he's a film producer, all the way to a surgeon. And I say the issue isn't just the hoodie. Race plays a big part in this conversation. So, you know, if you catch me on a day where I'm feeling groovy and I've not got back-to-back meetings, you'll probably catch me in a nice, probably looking like a bit like you know, nice jeans, blazers, shirt. That's my go-to outfit. My hair is actually, you know, a bit big, afro-y. You see it in that picture of me in Sadiq, but that's my go-to situation. But where my diary is so back-to-back now, I wake up in the morning, throw on something comfortable, and I'm out. Do you know what I mean? And that's what I do. Like, it's a lot right now, and I prepare my presentations and then send them to people on the day because I haven't had time over the week to send them. But it's all love. And so the hoodie is not the issue. Race plays a big part. And I say this as well. The UK isn't uncomfortable at the conversation of race. I feel like the UK is uncomfortable at the conversation of black. If it was done by corporates or some type of advertising machine, it'd have probably been called 56 BAME men. And everyone would have been wearing suits and ties smiling. You know? And these are the problems. So I want everyone to go for a quick exercise. I want you to close your eyes quickly. And I want you to imagine walking into work and we flipped the picture on its head. Imagine walking outside this building and the majority of people were black. So work, this building, outside this building, this room, and the majority of people you're sitting around, the person you're sitting next to is a black person. You are the only person that is not black. Only a few of you weren't. Imagine your workplace, imagine the train, imagine the general public, imagine the news presenters, imagine the fancy restaurants that we go to. Majority of the people are black and only you are not. And I pose the question of how does this make you feel? We can open our eyes. So because of the inadequate representation of black men, we have not been authentically visible through mainstream media for a long time. And I say authentically visible. We've been visible, but not authentically, and not the holistic truth of us. This singular narrative of the black man's identity is not only detrimental to our image throughout the wider society, but to our personal belief and understanding about ourselves. And this is that image again. And so the solution for me is black men need to take the lead on our own conversations. And here's a quick video of a really interesting and great speaker talking about some of the statistics for those who like statistics.
Pretends gang crime is a new problem. So when you look at the press reports they cite in their scholarship, it's the same sort of sense of moral panic. It's an unprecedented thing. When actually we've had violent teenage youth gangs for 150, 200 years, maybe even longer. And the social indicators of that violence have remained identical for almost 200 years, as have the sort of facile explanations.
And those social indicators are?
Poverty, domestic abuse, lack of education, so expulsion from school. So for example, almost half the people in prison today in Britain were expelled from school as children, versus just 1% of the population as a whole. Among young people, about half the young people in young offenders institutes were at some point in care growing up, versus about 1% in the population as a whole. So the social indicators have remained identical. Explanations, or what we call moral panics, the sort of idea of just having enough police or just having tougher sentences will work. A good friend of mine, Dr. Geisinger, did a PhD looking at tougher sentences all around the world, and she didn't find any correlation anywhere between tougher sentences and reduction of crime.
So those people who analyse it as a race problem,
yeah,
these are black gangs, these are Asian gangs, these are...
This is fascinating. I mean, let's just look at the maps. There are 1.2 million black people in London. In a bad year, 50 of them will kill someone. That's less than 0.004% of the black population. Therefore, anyone that thinks that blackness is a sufficient common denominator for violent crime clearly doesn't even understand what a common denominator is. Just to contrast, in a bad year in Glasgow, say 2005, there were 40 murders. There were only 600,000 people in Glasgow. So that year, a Glaswegian as a whole was twice as likely to be killed as a black Londoner. Whereas the commonalities, when you actually look at the demography of violent crime, the commonalities remain the same in Glasgow, Liverpool, Belfast, Naples, or London. Racial explanations are sort of way out for the powers that be, a way out for the wider society, and it's revealing that what happens in London is black on black crime, even when the person committing it is like me, has one white parent, one black parent. But what happens in Glasgow, race is not important.
I feel really led to just, I'm going to bring this chair. I'm not crazy, don't worry. I just want to sit down. I don't know. I speak in a lot of places, and I don't know if people really understand the severity of the mission. Who has a black friend here? Just, an actual friend. Everyone wants to put up their hand because you feel guilty. No, I'm joking. I'm fucking with you lot. I'm fucking with you lot. I have one, I promise. No, I'm joking. No, do you talk to your black friends about what they go through? Yeah? No? So for those that don't, I challenge you to. But it's an interesting one, do you know what I mean? Like, we focus so much on global issues. And I used to be that guy. Like, I wasn't the black guy. I wasn't. Until last year. Facts. I was always about, world peace. When people go to the Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, I'd be like, I can see why they'd say that. Maybe they shouldn't have said All Lives Matter at a Black Lives Matter march, but I can... And I came to what I'm detailing in my book as the second realization. I think a lot of black people go through this. I've never heard it coined as this before. My first realization that I was black was in primary school, one of my primary schools, where I was the only black person in the class and we had to paint, funny enough, headshots of ourselves. And in retrospect, it's funny because I know that the teacher would have had to go out of her way to buy brown paint and do you know what I mean? So I can get my skin, but I was the only black person. And I remember feeling a bit funny, but no one took the piss out of me because of it. And then the second realization generally is when a black person goes through some type of disadvantage or they might be served differently at a restaurant from their white friend. It's like, hang about, like I'm getting this treatment because I'm black, you know what I mean? And then it inspires some type of pride in you. And that was last year for me. And, it's a serious thing. When we talk about knife crime, peace and blah, 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 I would encourage everyone to smile at the next young black man they see. Do you know what I mean? Just give him a nod. You know what I mean? Like, we're not going to harm you, lot. Like, do you know what I mean? We got problems. Like, part of the campaign as well was a lot of the quotes we put out initially. One of them was, my brother is not my enemy. The media is not just conditioned the wider public to be afraid of black men, but it's conditioned black men to be afraid of ourselves. And so I see my brother in the streets. I'm, growing up, it's like you look at me a certain way. It's like, why are you looking at man? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, why is man looking at me? He's got eyes. He's allowed to look. But we're conditioned to almost see it as a threat. Fucking weird, man. You know what I mean? It's a real problem we have. And, I don't just come up here and do this for jokes or for bants. Do you know what I mean? It's something that we really want to solve. And we're so cool at looking at the global spectrum and, what's happening in the world and let's help Africa. There's no point in helping Africa if there's Africans in your community that you won't sit next to. And, it's less about just having a black friend and more about how you actually engage with black people that you don't know. And understanding that you don't know much. I'm still learning this black thing and I'm black. You know what I mean? Black doesn't actually exist on the continent. Only Africa. But I'm still. And so it is about sitting back and diversifying your information, which eventually informs the action, remember? So your information informs your belief informs your understanding, or so understanding informs your belief, and your belief informs your actions. So it's the information piece. And so when it comes to the conversation of women, I sit back and I ask questions. I'm speaking to a lady, and I wanted to hear what you're talking about because I don't understand that lived experience. All right, so remember this gentleman, the guy that wasn't in the panel, and he then ended up in the panel. This is what come up about him, like 2 weeks after he did that whole spill on TV. Cousin of TV star killed in stabbing. And this was after, so Good Morning Britain confidentially reached out to me and was like, yo, we want you to come on and have a good row of Pierce. And we were like, oh, fuck that, like, I'm not coming on, I don't need that, do you know what I mean? But anyways, this is what came out in the news after. And I say, what message does this send? Like, it's sad. What message is it? The only time that the media want to talk about this guy was not because he's the only black weatherman I know, but because his cousin was stabbed, not the perpetrator, was the victim. And when you read the article, it details that everyone said he was a good guy. But anyways, just wanted to put that visual image out there. And so this is the 56 Black Men campaign, and we rolled it out across billboards across the country. Something I'm really good at is strategy and branding. If anyone wanted to talk to me about that, I'm very happy to engage in conversations around those two things. And so, rolled it across the country. And I say here, we need to combat these images and messages by amplifying the very images that have been used to destroy our narrative. And as this image that now stands for change narrative. So, for me, the image now signifies, changing the narrative and not this negative image. And we did a launch for this in Peckham where we invited the community to come down. Sorry, did you want to get a picture of that?
Yeah.
No problem, go ahead.
Thanks.
Yeah? You got it?
Yeah, I got it.
So, we did a launch for that in Peckham, and we invited the community to come down and see the first unveiling. I'm at the end of my slide now. And this story really stood out to me. And it was a family, and this gentleman came to me, he said, my child asked me this. He says, he comes to the launch, he goes, Daddy, are these men dead? Have you seen all these men flash through? And it's mad, bro. Like this little kid, the first thought was that these black men are being amplified because they're dead, bro. Not because they did something like amazing, because they're dead. Serious issue that we're dealing with. We sit on the bus with these people all day long. And so I say it's for the next generation, you know. That's a cool picture. Company versus personal purpose. Should the two be separated? I now understand why I wrote this. Full circle! You guys are fucking cool, man. I speak on stages with like thousands of people. And you guys are a pretty cool crowd. I was in a corporate event, there's like hundreds of them, and I was like, I brought up my camera, I was like, how do you guys find this event? And everyone kind of looked at me, I was like, you lot better not leave me hanging, bro. Like, because you're wearing suits and ties. And everyone, it was cool. But anyway, so, you know, company versus personal purpose. Should they be separated? I don't know. Everyone's on their own individual journey, right? But we're real people at the end of the day. You know, and we have real stories. Business deals aren't made because you're the best at what you do. They're made because people actually fuck with you. Like, people like you. And that's why you can see some really shit businesses turning over loads of money, because they've got a really likeable person.